Hello and welcome back to another video. In today's video, I'm going to be going over statistically the best augments in the game. I'm only going to be covering the S tier ones, depending on whether or not they were taken first or overall, and just going over some of my thoughts as to why these augments are performing so well according to MetaTFT. And a little disclaimer is that this is the first guide video done by my editor, so of course we're still working things out, but if you have any feedback, I would love to see it down in the comments below. With all that being said, let's get into the video. And a little disclaimer is that I am only going over the S tier augments in this video. Of course, these are the best performing augments, so you should probably be trying to play them and use them if you're given the opportunity to do so. However, don't force them every single game. As for the A tier augments, they're probably all fine and they're probably a little bit more item and unit dependent. And as for the other augments that aren't performing as well, then that'd be even more so. Of course, this doesn't necessarily mean that you only take S tier augments, but I did want to give my thoughts as to why they're slightly outperforming the other augments instead. Okay, so starting out with the silver augments, with Innovator Heart being the highest placement, there's not too much to say about this. You can't get it as your first augment, so if you're lucky enough to get it later and you can pivot into 7 innovators, then it's almost a guaranteed top 4 if you can hit that chase. Of course, with the new buffs, 5 innovators is very stable, so that's why this augment on average is outperforming, because you don't necessarily need to get to that 7 innovators straight away, and you can also play around AP or AD, depending on if you hit items for Jace or Jhin. Otherwise, you can just play AP with either Heimer, Seraphine or Orianna carry. Next up we have Imperial Heart, which is obviously very good just because Imperial's in a very strong spot right now. It did get slightly nerfed, but just getting that early Imperial online early, if you're going to be carrying either Swain or Talon, will just usually secure your top 4 if you have the right items, just because you save so much HP early. Self-repair is another great augment if you're already running Innovator and you need to already have an Innovator augment. The reason is because if you have self-repair and you can't actually get the dragon because you don't have a heart or a soul, then you're never really taking this augment, and so it's for that reason that it's artificially higher than it would be normally. This isn't an augment that I'd go after, but of course if I'm already running Innovators, I'm going to be taking it. Calculated Loss is an extremely good augment because it just gives you a ridiculous amount of econ for a silver augment. You don't necessarily have to play reroll, you can play anything you'd like, and you're just getting so much econ, and so you're either going to be saving a ridiculous amount of health, or you're going to be econing up early and then pivoting into a strong board during the mid game and save a lot of HP that way. So small, it performs really well, not because 6 Yordle is necessarily strong, but if you run so small early game, you can actually win streak with Yordles, saving a lot of HP whilst also making a ridiculous amount of econ. So just because you get this augment does not mean you need to commit to 6 Yordle, it often just means you're playing 3 and then pivoting into a stronger mid and late game board. Cutthroat is a great augment for Sins, obviously it just synergizes really well. Jumping into the backline, not allowing them to cast means that you're going to be winning most of your fights. Featherweights is another great augment for streaking. You'll notice a pattern here where these augments don't actually lock you into reroll comps, but regardless of what comp you're deciding to play, Featherweights is extremely good because during the early game you're going to be saving a lot of HP whilst holding on to 1 and 2 cost units, which means not only are you saving HP, but you're also saving econ because you can be running things like a 2-star Ezreal or a 2-star Twitch, which means that you're only actually holding on to 3 gold on your board, which allows you to hit econ intervals a lot more frequently than other players. Say that they were carrying either a 3 cost 1-star, sometimes holding on to pairs, and even sometimes 2-starring them relatively early. And moving on to the gold augments, so as you can see with Titanic Force at the top, the reason this is so good is because if you take it as your second and third, you're getting an insane amount of value. Most of the time you're only taking the second or sometimes first if you already know you're going to be running bruises during the mid game. This way you'll be able to hit the threshold pretty easily and pretty consistently, and keep in mind when you hit this threshold, you're actually getting Knife's Edge 2 value on all of your units which are crossing that threshold, which is a really good augment just standalone, but this way you can freely move your units around. But if you take this augment later and you 3-star some units or you 2-star some 4 costs, with bruises and belt, you're actually getting all the way up to Knife's Edge 3, and again you can still move your units around. So of course this augment performs really well in the late game. You just don't really want to be taking it early because you're not going to be getting any value out of it. Chemical Overload 2 actually performs significantly well, mainly just because with Chemical Overload you can save a lot of HP. If you run anti-MR items such as Shiv or Spark, you're going to be saving a lot of HP during the mid game. I typically don't go for this augment because it doesn't cap very high. However, by taking this augment, you can secure a top 4 just because of your HP, but if you're trying to cap out for a first or second, then there's a lot of better options. All 4-on's really strong, mainly just because Imperials were really strong last patch. Right now it's okay, but the reason that it does so well is because obviously you're going to be stacking all of your damage on one unit in particular, and this just allows you to create a raid boss. Up next we have Imperial Crest. The reason this one does so well is because you can actually turn any unit you want into an Imperial and give them a ridiculous damage buff. Pretty common to see running Imperial Fiora or Imperial Yone, as this synergizes really well with Samira. After the Imperial nerfs, I don't think this performs as well as it might have last patch, but it's still a definitely strong and consistent gold augment. And finally we have Assassin Crest. Now this did really well last patch, mainly because of Talon being so strong. Right now Sins are in a decent spot because you can also play Shaco, although I wouldn't go after Assassin Crest necessarily unless you're very comfortable playing around Sins, because going from 2 to 4 or 4 to 6 when it comes to the Sin bonus isn't actually as important as some of the other augments such as Bodyguard, so I think this might have been artificially inflated just due to the patch being so strong and heavily dedicated towards Sins last patch. And if you look at the stats on the gold augments you can take early in order to have a high win percentage, the two that show up are Portable Forge and Spellblade. This is because if you get Gold Collector with Portable Forge, you can either high roll early and make a ridiculous amount of money, or you can all in at 3-2 and make your money back afterwards, saving yourself a lot of HP. And if you high roll on your 3-2 roll down, you can actually get a lot of econ and go all the way back up to the top, despite the fact that you had to open fort early and spend it all at 3-2. As for Spellblade, if you get 4 Arcanists early, or you have a blue buff TF, Morello TF, there's a lot of ways that you can actually cap your early and mid game board, just making Spellblade very, very consistent to top 4 with. And finally, moving on to the Prismatics, of course we have Innovator Soul at the top, because you can't get this as your first augment, but if you're lucky enough to get it later, it's basically a guaranteed top 4 because you're going to be able to hit the dragon very, very early. Next up we have Stand United, and the reason is because Stand United is extremely good this patch, and despite the fact that they nerfed it, they only nerfed 1 and 2. The way to cap your board every single game is to actually play maximum Stand United value due to the combination of legendaries being really strong and vertical traits being really weak. So if you can take this at all points of the game, it's going to be decently strong. Of course early you're not going to be getting as much value. Protector Crown is up there because if you take this, you're obviously going to be playing either around the Protector reroll or probably putting it on a unit such as Cho'Gath, where you're getting a ridiculous amount of shielding, and so it's for this reason that you're only really taking Protector Crown when you're strong, which artificially makes it look better than it actually is if you were to chase it. Assassin's Crown is good because again Sins was strong last patch. I don't actually think this augment is insane, but if you get it and you're already playing around Sins, then yes, of course it's great. Margin of progress is quite high because it gives you a ridiculous amount of econ and you can just play around reroll 3 cost carries. However, if you try to play around 4 cost 2 stars, you can sometimes struggle in the current meta, especially in a Prismatic lobby, to actually stabilize on 7. So it's for this reason that I would recommend leaning towards 3-star 3 costs. As for Arcanist Crown, this is very, very default. It's very easy to just play 6 to 8 Arcanists when you get this, and of course that's going to be very easy to play around as you don't have to think too much about your game, reducing the chances of you getting dizzy and securing a top 4 that way. Syndicate Crown is really strong because 7 Syndicate is still really strong right now. You can play around 3-star Shaco and Echo, or you can push levels and try to get that 2-star Akali. Cybernetics is really strong at all stages throughout the game. If you get it early, then you can streak due to the extra HP. The extra AD is nice as well, but it's mainly just playing around the fact that all of your units are going to be slightly stronger. Imperial Crown, similar to Assassin Crown, is just very strong because the Sins are very strong this patch, and if you play Imperial Crown, you can easily get 5 Imperial online early. Next we have Chemical Overload, which again, similar to Chemical Overload 2, it's just very strong because it guarantees your top 4 because you save so much HP early. If you run a 3 or 5 Chemtech board early, then you're going to have an easy time just killing 1 more unit every single time, basically just saving you a lot of HP. Scholar Soul is really good just because Scholars fits into every single board, and you also get 8 gold with this, so if you take it early, it's almost like getting a rich get richer as well, which is really nice because it allows you to hit econ levels earlier, and you can either roll down at 3-2 or you can roll down at 7 if you're high rolling a little bit. Woodland Charm is great for streaking early. If you take it later, you want to make sure that it's on a unit with good CC. So for example, if you get a second Mundo on the board, it's not actually going to do much because it's only 1500 health. But if you get something like a second Braum, then that ult is actually going to be significant significant enough to the point where you're going to be getting one extra cast and it's going to be disrupting the entire enemy team, just make sure that it's on a unit that's actually important, and you can manipulate this either by upgrading certain units or by using belt items to confirm that it goes on the highest HP unit. You need to keep some of the things that I said in mind, and if you have any other questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments, just because some augments can appear better than others just due to certain circumstance. However, generally speaking, the ones that are higher up are the ones that you should be chasing on average, as opposed to going for some of the ones that are lower. As always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have enjoyed, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.